Welcome to Small Talk, where each week we sit down to discuss the sermon-based small group questions at Wallula Christian Church.
Hello and welcome to Small Talk, Wallula's weekly podcast. We're so glad that you're here with us today. My name is Zach Bolin. I'm the student pastor here at Wallula Christian Church, and I am joined by Craig Archer, our worship pastor, and Lance Kaufman, our lead pastor. We are continuing on in our storyteller series, going through the parables of Luke, and today we're going to begin. We have a few things different today. We're going to not only go through looking at the persistent widow today, but also we're going to be answering some viewer questions. So just a reminder that if you have any questions about the sermons that are being preached, or just anything about the Bible or theology, or I don't know what else, finances? Probably not finances.
Let's not offer
so
those.
Not all questions, but things that pertain to life, faith, anything else that you've just been wondering, be sure to send that to us. Craig, what's the email that they could send that to us?
smalltalk@wallula.org.
Oh, good. Yes.
I was kind of nervous I wasn't going to get it for a
I
second.
forgot it. That's what I was like, I think Craig will know. So we're going to be doing all of that today, but as always, we're going to start off with a fun question, and it's one that, man, when I saw this coming up, I thought, how many times has someone asked this question, right? Mm-hmm. And it goes, if you had to eat one meal every day for the rest of your life, what would it be and why? So, Craig, we'll just start with you.
Okay. Here's my answer. Tacos.
Tacos?
Yes. Because I was thinking about other things I like, like barbecue.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Barbecue's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't think I could eat it every day for the rest of my life. But with tacos, you have variety,
Sure.
different toppings to mix in,
Right.
different shells, different meats, all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I think that's a good answer because you're going to get variety.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think they're great. So that's my answer.
Tacos.
Okay. Yeah. What about you, Lance?
Taco Tuesday, taco any day.
Any day.
That's right.
Taco every day?
Yes.
Tacos. I first of all, I felt a little self-conscious because I read this question and I thought, man, a lot of these opening questions center around food.
Oh.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
started,
true. I hadn't thought about
started to
that.
think, be a little self-conscious. Maybe I'm, but
I write them around lunchtime.
yes. But to answer the question, I kind of along the same lines as Craig. I thought pizza.
Yeah.
I love pizza, and you can put anything on
Yeah.
a slice of bread and call it pizza.
Yeah.
So many
there's
possibilities.
barbecue pizza, and there's taco pizza. You can buy a taco pizza, and there's pepperoni pizza, all these
Breakfast.
different,
Right.
It's a
breakfast
breakfast food.
pizza.
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
all these
breakfast
varieties of pizza. I was we were hanging out with over spring break with our kids, watching a ball game, and we were in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So one of Zoe's friends from school she lives in Oklahoma, came to Bartlesville to see Zoe. You've been in this situation where you're trying to figure out, okay, we're going to go eat after the ball game. Where should we go eat? And everybody has not only differing opinions, but there's dietary concerns and all those things. Trying to balance and weigh all those things to figure out where do we go. And I don't want to throw Zoe's friend under the bus, but I will.
Shout out
to Reagan.
Okay.
Reagan told me we were talking about maybe going for pizza, and she said, "Oh, I don't like pizza."
Really?
I said, "But this is the first person I've ever met that has said, oh, I don't like pizza." I mean, I've met people that I
Certain
only
kinds
like
of
cheese
pizzas,
pizza.
right. Yeah.
I don't want anchovies.
Yeah.
All sorts of mushrooms, all kinds of toppings that I don't want on the pizza.
Yep.
But somebody who just said, I don't like pizza. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, what are you talking about? She said, well, I don't like bread with sauce on it and then other toppings. And I thought, what?
Isn't that what a sandwich is?
Yeah. I was like, what do you eat? I was really, I was troubled by this. And so, Reagan, we love you, but
that is weird.
I don't know. Yeah, have some pizza, for crying out loud. So my answer is pizza.
Yeah, so just like most of these questions, I put too much thought into something that doesn't matter. But I was really trying to think, okay, what would I want if it's going to be something I'm probably going to not like after, you're forced to eat it all the time. So when I was a kid and even in college, I would have said cereal. I'd be like, oh, you could eat any type of cereal. You can have the healthy cereal. But then I started thinking deeply about it. And I'm like, but I got to think about my health long term. That can't be healthy. Just a diet of cereal. So I was like, I got to really plan ahead. I thought about tacos, but I was like, I don't know if that's going to. So I was like, what's something that's going to, So a couple of things. I thought I love sushi. I was trying to think of not loopholes, but things that could change, like you said.
Yeah.
So I thought sushi's I love sushi. It's generally healthy, but you can also get it like really healthy where it's just the raw fish, which I still like, or the stuff with all the things on it.
Or it's like fried or
Felt
something.
like, felt like it was cheating. But
cream cheese.
Technically, I wrote this, but I don't mean it. But a salad, you could do a lot with a salad, like a different type of meats. And if you wanted to be like, you could do like potato salad and I thought, is this fair?
Jello.
And I thought, no. And so, Jello salad. I'm telling you, man, it's a good loophole.
Pizza salad.
A pizza salad. That's right. My final answer that I landed on was just sandwiches, because I do love. I mean, like Jimmy John's and stuff like that. I could do that all the time. And there's just so many. I would say loopholes, but you could do anything for like even vegetarian to steak to whatever, and so there's enough variety there that you could call it. Technically, still a sandwich, and you can put all the sauce on the bread that you want.
Cold,
yeah,
all those things,
yeah. And there's different types of breads, and so there's a wide,
great answer,
wide option of options.
I can support all those answers.
All right,
good things.
I'm glad you approved. So anyway, I liked digging deep on this. Of what would I think be good?
Right,
but I'm happy with that answer. Speaking of answers, is that a good segue? We have some answers for the questions that were asked to Walula. These are from Kirsten, who had originally asked these a while ago. We answered one of them, and we're going to finish up the other two. But if you also have any questions for us, we have a wealth of knowledge here, wealth of something,
right?
A wealth of time to answer the question. If nothing else, then we'll see how we do actually answering your questions. But we do like doing it. We do like wrestling with that stuff, and maybe we can give a perspective on it. The first one is just very simply. It says, "Why is Jesus referred to as our portion?" So we looked into it a little bit. Craig, you said you had some stuff that you found out.
Yep, I did a deep dive at midnight while my sick daughter was asleep next to me.
Okay.
So here we go.
Yeah.
But I think this is a good question, because when I saw it, I thought of, there's a song we sing. We've sang it for a long time called "The Way." In the first verse, we sing, "You are my portion. You are my hiding place." And I think, when I'm picking songs, I try to pick songs that have language that we would understand. But there are times where things like this can make its way into a song, and we might not totally get it. And I think this is an awesome question, and so hopefully I can do it justice. But this language of God or Jesus as our portion starts in the Old Testament. We see it a lot in the Psalms. So for instance, just one of them, David in Psalm 16 verse 15 says, "Lord, you alone are my portion, in my cup you make my lot secure." And throughout the Psalms, we see that language, God, you are my portion. So that word, portion, it can be kind of interchanged with inheritance in the Old Testament. And that's a big deal. If you look at the story of Israel, you think about dividing up the land, the promised land. They're going to get an inheritance, a division of what God has promised to them. But then in Deuteronomy 10, as the land is getting portioned out or divided, it says to the tribe of Levi, "Levi has no portion nor inheritance with his brethren. The Lord is his inheritance, just as the Lord your God promised him." So all of a sudden, this language about portions or inheritance, thinking about the land, the promised land, gets turned, and it's not like a physical thing in front of them, but saying that the Lord is their inheritance or their portion, turns into something different. So then you kind of take that idea, you fast forward to New Testament, thinking about, and the question too is stated, Jesus referencing or being referenced as our portion. But you can think, so Old Testament, they're saying God is our portion, but Jesus as God's Son, part of the Trinity, we are heirs of the inheritance because of Jesus as God's Son. Hebrews 9:15 says, "Therefore he is the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant." So this language of portion, inheritance, now gets put on us. And because of Jesus, because of his sacrifice and resurrection, God is something that we get to receive as our portion, as our inheritance. Thinking about God's kingdom, living in God's kingdom, if we were to say that Jesus is my portion, it's kind of stating that we're not relying on the things of this world anymore. We're not looking to status or physical things to fulfill our needs and sustain us. And I think that's kind of the heart of what we see in the Psalms too, when we say that God is my portion, God is my inheritance. That's the treasure that we're looking at, and that's what we look forward to from now into eternity. And as I was studying, there was a quote right at the end of this article I was reading that said, "If God is our portion, we need nothing else." I was just like, that was it. That was the ending. I was like, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So that's what I got.
No, yeah, that's really good. Quick question, because the actual question that was asked is, why is Jesus referred to as our portion? Did you find anything where it actually mentions Jesus and portion?
No.
Yeah, I didn't either.
The language in Scripture is that God is our portion.
Right.
So my thinking is kind of how I laid it out. It's like, God is our portion, and then because of Jesus, God's Son,
right,
that is
right. You can make the connection there, but I was looking for if there was a verse about, and I was like, man, I didn't see that, and I was like, is it just a translation thing? But the idea is still there.
Right.
But like you said, most of what I found was just in the Psalms and the Old Testament, and everything that I have is what you had already said. The idea of inheritance, but specifically, I was looking at Psalm 73. The idea that, if it is an inheritance, it's something that is like a completion, a source of security, and then if you take that idea of like source of hope, happiness, or blessing, right? And so we see in Psalm 73:26, it says, "My flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." And so he is my hope. I am content in him. And it says, "Whom I have in heaven, but who do I have in heaven but you? And the earth has nothing I desire beside you." And so, if we have God, then we have everything we need. This inheritance, this thing that fills us with blessing and happiness and contentment, security and hope. Yeah. So that's my shortened answer to that. But yeah, you could definitely see the connection to Jesus being referred to it, and also that idea, like you said, used in songs, why that would have such a strong meaning.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, you're like, yeah, what
right.
does portion mean? I think a portion of like a food.
Yeah. right.
And so, it's just my part of that I get, but it's actually a deeper meaning. When
and
you
even
look
like
into
this
it.
was good for me because we've been singing that song for, I think, the whole time I've been here, 4 years maybe, and doing kind of just a quick little word study on it.
Yep.
The next time we sing that song, that verse is going to be even more meaningful,
right?
Because I'm going to think about these things.
Yeah.
So it's a great thing to do.
Yeah. Moving on, we have the other question, which is, why does God say? It says in this chapter, but we'll just say, why does God say that he lays the sins of the parents on their children, but then later on but later he told Moses that parents and children are not to be punished for the sins, for each other's sins. And so in certain passages we say that children will be punished for their parents' sins, and then in other places we see that not to do that. And so, Lance, what are some of the ideas that you had to help answer that question?
Well, I think it's probably referring to Deuteronomy chapter 5 And so we get the Ten Commandments. I'm looking at verse 9 that says, "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me." And so that's sounds severe, and it is severe. But then you get verse 10, "But showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." You go over to Exodus chapter 20, verses 5 and 6. We're going to read similar language there. And again, we're in the account of the Ten Commandments in Exodus. "You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." You can find similar language used in different places in the prophets in the Old Testament, and I think there's a couple of ideas here that we could talk about, that we could discuss. The first is that there's always consequence to sin. And so, you think about maybe a child who, has an alcoholic parent. Well, there's baggage, there's weight that's accumulates over a lifetime with growing up with that parent, that child will carry with them into adulthood. And so there's consequence to that sin, and that we pass on to those around us, but especially in that parent-child relationship. So that's one way to think of it. Mostly, though, that child isn't doomed because of the sin of their parent. We know that we've all experienced or talked to or heard the story of a child who overcomes terrible circumstances, and to live a successful, meaningful, great life, right? It happens all the time. People overcome those kinds of circumstances. Not always, but it can be done. And I think really the answer to this question, what's God trying to say here, what's he talking about, is found in the last part of both of those verses, that the folks that God is punishing because of their sin is folks who, the children, generation after generation, who have remained or become unfaithful to God. And so that blessing side is always present too. When you're faithful to God, you receive his blessings. It's why this is a weird connection, I think, but it's why we don't practice infant baptism. We don't baptize infants at Wallula Christian Church, because we believe it's a believer's baptism. The New Testament teaches you get to decide, am I going to say yes to Jesus and follow after him? And I choose that. And every single one of us has the opportunity, no matter how we grew up, no matter where we came from, no matter what we look like, no matter any of those things, we have the opportunity to say yes to Jesus. And when we say yes to Jesus, we receive our portion. We receive our inheritance. We're grafted into his family. We're adopted into his family. We're made a part of his church, of his team, and we receive those things. And so really the key here, I think, is that it's our choice to say yes or no to God in our lives. And that's where the real blessings and punishment of sin come. There's some consequences that we might carry because of sin of others in our lives, and especially as parents and kids. And one of the reasons that, Proverbs 20 becomes so important, right? Proverbs 22 verse 6 is a familiar verse to us. Train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not turn from it. As parents following after Jesus, we want to be faithful to him. We want to do everything we can to train, to lead, to disciple. We don't often think of it in those terms, I think, but our first job as a parent is to disciple our children, into a growing relationship with Jesus. And there are real benefits to that. I mean, you talk about, we use language and today's world that we're blessed, or we have these we kind of have this leg up in life, and man, there's not a bigger leg up you can give your child in life than to know Jesus.
Yeah.
And that advantage that we're advantaged in that way. And so I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah. I think it's a really good question, and I think a lot of times we read the Old Testament and say, okay, that's just how things were, and then now it's different. But yeah, really kind of getting into it and be like, why is that? And like you said, you can see it practically even today when we look at how each generation, like those who go to church, is in decline.
Right.
And a lot of it is because the parents before had kind of been more apathetic toward it, and we see, well, here's the result of that. It continues on. And so, yeah, really, really good. Well, we're going to move on now to the story this week of the story of the persistent widow in Luke chapter 18, verses 1 through 8. This is going along with the reading plan. It's not going along with what was preached. And so we had Calvin this past week coming to preach. And then also this upcoming Sunday is going to be Casey. So you're not going to be here either. You're going to be at Sunflower?
Right.
All right.
Correct.
Yeah. And so anyway, if you're like, I don't remember this story on Sunday, it's because it's going along with the reading. But in the story of the persistent widow, the question is, what are some reasons Jesus might be telling his disciples this story in general? And what ways does this story apply to us? So we're going to just have one question, but pretty big, and just big takeaways. What do you think? Why did he tell it? And how does it, apply to us? And so do you want to, Craig, would you like to go?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Why don't I read the story?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
I just prepped it with we haven't heard this yet, and so let's just start talking.
Right. It's just 8 verses.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, let's. This is Luke chapter 18, the first 8 verses. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared about men, and there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. And the Lord said, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth?
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Craig.
Okay.
You can go now.
Well, I think so. The first part of that question, some of the reasons that Jesus might be telling his disciples this story, we get an answer to that question, I guess, in the beginning of the parable. So verse 1, it just says that they ought always pray and not lose heart.
Unusual with parables.
Right.
Yeah, he doesn't
have this.
He doesn't tip it off.
Because they're always like, wait, what were you talking about? And
right.
Like, okay, so this is...
He sets it up.
So there, right there, like that's the purpose or kind of the intended outcome of this parable. And I do think, too, my mind kind of went towards Revelation a little bit when we were reading this, because it reminded me of Revelation 6, the saints that are crying out for justice.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And God says, like, in my timing.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, just be patient, just wait. And the previous chapter, Luke 17, like the subheading is the coming of the kingdom.
Right.
So like leading up to it, it's all about kind of this end time, like what that's going to look like a little bit.
Right.
So I think the I don't know, the actual chronological order of like how this all happened, but they're like set next to each other in the gospel. So I think that's really interesting because we kind of see some parallels there. But the next part of the question is how does this apply to us? I think it's really easy in this story to kind of set ourselves as the persistent widow and just think about, well, of course we always need to be in prayer and continually going to God. That's a good thing. We should be doing that for sure. That's the purpose that was said. We ought to always pray and not lose heart. But then I think another piece of it too is the character of God in this and how that should be applied to us and affect us in how we pray. Because I think a couple things, like in verse 7, and will not God give justice to his elect who cry out to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily, which is really, it's saying like God's going to do what he's promised to do. And so the big thing is that's part of his character. That's who he is. He's always going to stay true to his word and follow through. And so for us, I think part of the application is really just remain faithful.
Right.
And that's part of it, is continuing to pray and not lose heart. But throughout each day, like, know that God is going to come through. And just the parallel of the judge and God, and this is really interesting because it's like, even this judge that didn't care about God, kind of doesn't even really care about people, was like, okay, fine. But God loves us. So how much more would he want to come through and stay true to his word? So I think there's a lot of reassurance in this. And I think it does just help us to remain faithful. It's a very encouraging, just right at the end there, where it's like, why wouldn't God do this for us? So,
yeah, I think it is kind of an odd story on the surface, because normally when Jesus tells a parable, and he's talking about like a landowner or a master or whatever, you're like, okay, that's God, right? And then you start going, you're like, okay, there's a judge, got it, that's God. And then you find out this judge is kind of a jerk, like he's not a good guy, and it's like he neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And you're like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem. And this widow is nagging him, and he finally relents, and you're like, what? Wait, what? Who's what in this story, and why is God this way? And one of the things that was brought up was like, this is not a parable of comparison, but a parable of contrasting. And so just having that in mind, if you're reading this and being like, God's a judge, but this judge is just being nagged. So is the point to be nagged just to nag God? And so that is not. But I like what you said earlier about knowing the context of like what was before this, where Jesus was talking about the second coming. So he's talking about the second coming, and then in verse 22 of the previous chapter, he said, "The time is coming when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, but you will not see it." So there's going to be times when it's going to be difficult, right? And so in that, how do you get through it? What should you do? And so then we see this next story about how to approach God. And basically, if it's a parable of contrast, we have this judge who doesn't care about God, doesn't care about people, but still relents to the person who is persistent. And so then the contrasting part is, how much more will God, who loves you, give you what you seek, the justice that you seek? And it's funny you said Revelation, because Revelation 6 was exactly what I thought too. Like she's seeking this justice, and we have the end times, the seeking justice, and that God will fulfill that. And I remember thinking like, oh yeah. And even though I think yours said speedily, mine says, I forget the exact wording in the NIV that I was reading, quickly, I believe, but it doesn't mean immediately.
Right.
And so just to clarify that, like,
that's true.
The justice will come quickly or speedily, but not now. And so we also have to just understand the context of like, well, what does that mean? That if the justice will come that that we're seeking out, that he will still be faithful, and his timeline is not ours. And so sometimes it may feel like a cop out, like, oh, but understanding the context of, we were just talking about the second coming, so it could be even after we die, but he still will be faithful in not only in his promise to us, but also in being a God of justice. Anyway, so how much more would the loving Father do this, even if a judge who doesn't care would? And so the point is not, the application is not like, should we pester God until he gives in? But just reminding them, we're not pestering God when we persistently ask for things. And when Jesus talks about, asking or seeking or knocking, and be intentional about approaching God, especially when you're going through difficult times. Keep pursuing God. He desires to hear from you. He desires to help. But then at the very end, when he's talking about, will you be faithful? At the very end, when the second coming, I guess, let's see. when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on this earth? And so this idea of like, will we remain faithful and persistent, or would we just give up because it's too hard? And so having that kind of mindset of just being patient and long suffering, even if that's the case, that we would stick with it. So if the woman can persist, this is my last thought, if the woman can persist with an unrighteous judge, then we can persist with the loving God who actually does care for us. In our request to him, prayers to him.
And even as you said, the contrast. So like placing that, the widow and the unjust judge, there's not a relationship there at all.
Right.
And how even better is it that God sees us as children and we're coming to him.
Right.
So just even that, you're like, okay.
It's an encouragement too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I just, I mean, you guys are right on target. I think a couple verses earlier in Luke ought to remind us of that contrast between God and the unjust judge in this story. Luke chapter 11 verse 13 says, "If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give the Holy Spirit to those who ask him?" God loves to provide these things for us. Chapter 12 verse 32 says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom." That God is looking to provide for us with his kingdom, that he loves to share these things with us. And I'm just thinking about this story a little bit and how that's true. And then why do we get this story? Because sometimes it doesn't seem like it's true. You know, sometimes it seems like we are dealing with an unjust judge, that we keep going and he says, he delays, or puts it off, or doesn't seem to answer our prayer. And I thought about what role should prayer play in our life? Like, what's one of the benefits of having a vibrant, consistent prayer life? And I think many of us would say, well, prayer provides us with peace, or this opportunity to rest in God, that it comforts us, that it provides us with that peace. And I think, yeah, absolutely. In fact, the sermon series following Easter will be back in Hebrews chapter 4, and the sermon series is just titled Rest. And I think, man, we each one need that portion from God, the rest, the peace that he provides. And the trouble is that sometimes our prayer life seems more like wrestling with God than resting in God. And I started to think, well, which one of these is, you know, if I'm wrestling with God in my prayer life, am I doing something wrong?
Right.
Is there something wrong in my prayer life? And I don't, spoiler alert, I don't think so. You know, there are so many times in Scripture when, you know, folks are literally wrestling with God, and just over and over, you think about Abraham kind of negotiating with God for, you know, for Lot, and you think, man, how the audacity of Abraham, you know, how courageous maybe, or how, you know, how much gumption he has to wrestle with God in that way. But even Jesus, you know, in the garden, is there some other way? You know, and he keeps going back, and he goes to his disciples, and they're asleep. And how come you guys aren't wrestling with God along this way and with me? And so I think sometimes that to me, that's the point of this story, is that, look, sometimes our prayer life, you know, we've got this thing. I'm praying for my husband to just give in to Jesus. You know, for 15 years I've been praying, and he's yet to give in to Jesus. Don't stop.
Right.
You know, keep wrestling. You know, I'm praying for my aunt because she has this, you know, has cancer, and for 15 months, you know, it doesn't seem. Keep praying, keep wrestling, and keep going back to him. Be persistent. Continue to wrestle. I was just talking to to Katie, who does many of our graphics and whatnot for stuff here at church and here at Wallula. And she was working on the sermon series coming up after Easter, Rest. And I said, well, one of my ideas was like a hammock. And I did that because I think, I mean, you maybe can remember resting, laying peacefully in a hammock on a beautiful spring or summer day, and you think, oh man, it doesn't get better than this. This is the most restful, peaceful place I could be, under this tree, next to this stream or lake, and this is so wonderful. And maybe you don't remember getting in and out of the hammock. It requires, for some of us more than others, but it requires some work to get in and out of a hammock.
Yeah.
You kind of have to wrestle with that thing.
Yeah, balance yourself.
Yes, to get in and out. And sometimes, our walk with Jesus is like getting in and out of the hammock.
Yeah.
There's some work to be done to
rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to me, that's where I came away from this story. I just think it's encouragement. It's so, along those same lines, I think you're right, Craig and Zach, you both mentioned, Revelation 6 and the context of the story here in Luke, right after chapter 17, where Jesus is talking about the end times, and even here at the end of the story, look, when the Son of Man comes, that's the context of the story, and that language of, is he going to provide justice? Oh yeah, quickly, right? Well, okay, if it's quickly, then why does the widow have to keep going back? Why is the story about persistence, endurance, continuing to wrestle?
Yeah.
And that's just one of the great questions or whatever. We don't have easy answers to this, but Jesus is coming back. He's going to be faithful. It will be absolutely enough. It'll be absolutely, that's the language to me of the quickly and the, speedily, maybe, whatever those words are. To me, I think we ought to hear completely.
Right. Yeah.
There won't be any question.
Right.
There won't be any loose ends. There won't be any wrestling left to do. The match will be over.
Right.
And so, anyway, it's a great little story.
Yeah.
That has a lot that we can take away from it.
Yeah. I'm glad we got to talk about it. This is not one that I think I've taught much to youth group, and so it was nice to dig in and kind of figure out why is it described that way. And well, we hope you guys can join us this Sunday as we will hear from Casey, and then just continuing on with our storyteller series. We hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah.